Good morning. This is Omni View, episode 115 for July 17th, 2026. Multiple perspectives, one briefing. We'll cover what happened, how different viewpoints frame it, so you can decide for yourself. A Ukrainian tycoon's accusation that Kyiv's intelligence service tried to assassinate him in Monaco highlights deepening internal fractures that could affect the country's war effort and Western support. A Ukrainian property developer targeted in a Monaco explosion that injured his partner and son has publicly blamed Ukraine's military intelligence service for the attack. The incident occurred recently and has drawn attention to possible internal Ukrainian conflicts extending beyond the country's borders. Ukrainian security officials maintain that operations against perceived threats are necessary to protect national interests during wartime, and that public accusations without full evidence risk undermining operational security. Critics, including the affected businessman, argue that any state-linked action against civilians abroad erodes rule of law standards and invites reciprocal risks for Ukrainian figures living overseas. Ukrainian officials have not confirmed or denied involvement, while the tycoon points to prior tensions with authorities as context for his claim. What evidence would be needed to substantiate or refute the tycoon's claim? Now shifting to U.S. politics. Senators Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez are scheduled to campaign for Abdul El-Sayed in Michigan's Democratic primary, where AIPAC has directed substantial spending toward his opponent, Haley Stevens. Sanders and Ocasio-Cortez supporters contend that consistent advocacy on domestic economic issues builds long-term voter coalitions and that large outside spending distorts primary outcomes. Opponents within the party argue that unified support for candidates with broader appeal maximizes chances of retaining seats in competitive districts. Progressive groups frame the effort as a push for policy priorities on healthcare and economic fairness, while centrist Democrats emphasize the risks of internal party spending battles ahead of general elections. How do outside spending patterns typically affect primary turnout? Meanwhile, in manufacturing, the head of the Chicago Federal Reserve visited Snap-on, a century-old Wisconsin company that supplies professional mechanics, to examine factors behind its recent expansion. Company executives highlight steady demand and skilled workforce retention as drivers, while regional economists note the visit reflects broader interest in manufacturing resilience. Business leaders argue that long-term investment in specialized tools and training creates durable competitive advantages even amid economic shifts. Analysts focused on monetary policy suggest that understanding such localized success stories helps calibrate interest rate decisions affecting employment. What indicators does the Fed typically examine during regional visits? Turning to European finance. Asset manager Amundi has urged the European Union to permit oil and gas holdings within a new fund category designed to support lower carbon economic shifts. Proponents of flexible rules argue that gradual inclusion of transitional fuels can finance infrastructure upgrades without abrupt supply disruptions. Strict exclusion advocates maintain that clear boundaries prevent greenwashing and direct capital toward genuinely low-emission technologies. The firm cites the need for pragmatic transition pathways that maintain energy security, while environmental advocates stress the importance of strict exclusion criteria to accelerate decarbonization. How are fund classification rules typically developed at the EU level? In market activity, U.S. executives have been disposing of company stock at the second fattest rate in more than 2 decades, according to market data. Market analysts tracking insider activity argue that sustained high-volume selling can precede broader corrections because executives possess detailed operational information. Portfolio managers counter that tax planning and diversification needs often drive such sales independently of short-term price expectations. Some investors interpret the activity as a caution signal about valuations, while others view it as routine portfolio rebalancing by individuals with concentrated holdings. What reporting requirements apply to insider transactions? On defense contracts, Swedish fighter jet manufacturer Saab exceeded expectations in its latest results as governments increase procurement. Procurement advocates emphasize that timely orders preserve industrial capacity and deter potential adversaries. Fiscal skeptics stress the value of competitive bidding and life cycle cost analysis before committing large sums. Defense officials cite urgent capability needs, while budget watchdogs question long-term affordability of accelerated spending. How do European defense budgets typically allocate between equipment and personnel? In Australian politics, the Victorian Liberal Party removed sitting MP Moira Deeming as a candidate for the November state election after she withdrew a legal challenge against the party. Party officials described the decision as necessary for internal discipline, while Deeming's supporters see it as limiting debate on certain social issues. Party executives argue that unified candidate slates improve electoral prospects and reduce distractions during campaigns. Supporters of the former MP contend that pre-selection processes should accommodate a range of views to maintain broad voter coalitions. Procedures govern candidate disendorsement in Australian state parties. Similar cases have affected subsequent election results in documented instances. Legal challenges have played roles in internal party disputes before. How have similar cases affected subsequent election results? Turning to Indian startups, fast delivery startup Zepto is reportedly targeting a valuation well below its previous $7 billion peak as it prepares for an Indian listing. Investors cite concerns over cash burn and path to profitability, while company backers point to rapid user growth in a competitive market. Skeptics of high valuations argue that sustained losses require clearer evidence of scalable margins before large public offerings. Growth advocates maintain that market share gains in quick commerce can justify patience on near-term earnings. Indian regulators evaluate IPO pricing disclosures under established rules. Investors typically prioritize metrics for delivery platforms such as user acquisition costs. Comparable startups have performed in varied ways post-listing. How do Indian regulators evaluate IPO pricing disclosures? In asset management strategies, portfolio manager Kevin Zhao at UBS Asset Management intends to bet against U.S. Treasuries, expecting stronger U.S. growth to reduce demand for government debt. The strategy rests on relative economic performance between the U.S. and Europe, while fixed income specialists caution about interest rate volatility. Relative value traders argue that divergent growth trajectories create opportunities in cross-border bond markets. Duration-focused investors emphasize the importance of monitoring inflation data before taking directional positions. Factors influence treasury demand from foreign investors through economic differentials. Asset managers hedge interest rate exposure using established instruments. Signals precede shifts in safe haven flows according to historical patterns. What factors influence treasury demand from foreign investors? In technology developments, Chinese startup Moonshot AI introduced its latest Kimiok model, claiming performance comparable to leading systems from OpenAI and Anthropic. Industry observers note continued convergence in large model capabilities across regions, while policymakers track implications for technology competition. Developers highlight rapid iteration as evidence that open research accelerates progress for all users. Regulators focused on security stress the value of export controls and evaluation standards, regardless of origin. New AI models are typically benchmarked against predecessors through standard tests. Infrastructure requirements support training at this scale via large compute clusters. Companies decide between open and closed deployment strategies based on internal priorities. How are new AI models typically benchmarked against predecessors? Regarding social media platforms, Trump Media announced plans to offer high-speed access to Truth Social posts for a fee, prompting concerns about market-moving information. Company representatives describe the feature as standard product development, while transparency advocates warn of unequal information access. Platform operators argue that tiered services can fund improvements and that disclosure rules already govern material non-public information. Critics contend that paid early access to influential accounts risks creating information asymmetries with regulatory consequences. Disclosure obligations apply to social media companies regarding paid features under current guidelines. Similar access models have been regulated in financial markets through prior enforcement actions. Precedents exist for premium content tiers on political platforms from earlier platform experiments. What disclosure obligations apply to social media companies regarding paid features? And in celebrity news, Kris Jenner posted on Instagram that her mother, Mary Jo Campbell, had died at age 91. Family statements focus on personal loss, while entertainment coverage places the announcement in the context of the Kardashian-Jenner public profile. Public figures often use social media to share family news directly with followers, allowing immediate expression of grief. Observers note that such announcements can also generate renewed attention for ongoing media projects. Celebrity families typically manage public announcements of private losses through controlled releases. Social media plays a role in shaping public mourning through direct posts. Similar announcements have affected media cycles in documented past instances. How do celebrity families typically manage public announcements of private losses? Now, to really understand the first story, most coverage of security service allegations assumes clear chains of command and immediate public confirmation. Yet many agencies operate with deliberately compartmentalized authority that limits what any single official can verify. When an individual claims state involvement in an incident overseas, the factual baseline is often limited to the occurrence of the event itself and the claimant's prior relationship with authorities. Everything else depends on internal records that remain classified. Knowing this, readers can distinguish between the undisputed facts of an explosion and the separate question of institutional responsibility, rather than treating an accusation as either proven or dismissed solely on the basis of official silence. Next time you see reporting on such claims, ask what public evidence exists beyond the accusation. What legal avenues are available for investigation, and how do similar past cases illustrate the gap between allegation and adjudication? Tomorrow, watch for further details on the Zepto valuation ahead of its planned Indian listing. That's Omni View. For full source links and more context, check out today's written briefing on the Omni View summaries page. As always, compare outlets, look for primary documents, and separate what's known from what's assumed. If balanced perspectives are valuable to you, share this with a friend and subscribe wherever you listen. See you tomorrow, and if you'd rather watch than listen, find us on YouTube at Nara Network. Links in the show notes. This show comes to you from the Nara Network. If you want another sharp daily briefing, the Do Positive Pod has you covered. Good news in science and tech, plus one concrete action you can take. All our shows are free at naranetwork.com. Prefer reading? Today's full write-up, sources, and transcript are on the episode blog at naranetwork.com. Same briefing, readable format. This episode used AI voice synthesis of my voice. Editorial selection and analysis are my own.